Adaptations in media have always been a bit of a mixed bag. Taking an idea from another source, such as books, and turning it into a movie will almost always lose something in translation, and there will be critics who will dislike the movie version because it changed some character or left some story plot by the wayside. Video game adaptations have almost universally been panned, thanks to them either ignoring the source of the original product or doing the traditional Hollywood schlock and applying it to the game in question. But the last few years have changed that, with movies like Sonic and Mario showing that video game movies can not only be adapted for the big screen, but also done pretty well. But for as enjoyable as both of those films are, there's one Netflix series that has become the holy grail of game adaptations. It's time for us to talk about one of the most wonderful series done, based off one of the most rage-inducing of games, League of Legends Arcane. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. Now, I'll be entirely honest, when I first heard of Arcane, I didn't think much of it. I had played League of Legends when I was younger, starting from when Sona got introduced into the game, but I haven't really touched it in some time, mostly thanks to the aforementioned rage. I also never really had confidence in anything that they could do story-wise, mostly thanks to the fact that they did a complete obliteration of their in-game lore, removing their stories they originally had because they found it limiting to any future ideas. While an understandable notion to try and make their world feel a little bit better, it was between these two factors that I had lost interest in the franchise outside of the card game that came by a few years later. But then people continued to talk about it, and the more I heard from others, it kept on getting the same feedback, ranging from that this is a pretty good series to it's absolutely fantastic. And apparently the reception and love for the story is so good that the game company behind League itself said that this is going to be the new direction for their game, where any and all lore stuff is going to be brought in line with Arcane's story. So I thought, why not start off the new year right by talking about a series that premiered a few years ago? Wait. So, how exactly does a story based on a MOBA game actually start off a TV show of their very own? Well, like that. I'll be entirely honest. This opening sequence alone is what got me into binge watching this entire show. We're dropped into the end of a fight, only seeing the effects and damage it's done to the world, with corpses on the ground and fire as far as the eye can see. In just a few minutes, we get to see this horror that this bloodbath has brought, leaving these two characters orphans and adopted by one of the only survivors of the fight. And outside of the opening song lyrics one of the girls is singing, the scene is done entirely with background music only, letting the animation tell the story. It's a short but heartbreaking opening. This is where we should talk about what Arcane truly is, because while it seems simple to start out with, being about the story of Violet and Powder, the two sisters we see in the opening sequence, it's much more than that. In many ways, the story of Arcane does a lot of setup, growth, and even hints to the events of the wider world that the League of Legends has been building up over the years. While a lot of lore have been told through either in-game text, short stories, or character interactions, there never felt like there was a greater narrative at play, or to explain why things were the way they were. Arcane does this by taking some of the more famous and popular of League's characters and detailing the story of how they became what players know of them today. There are two particular stories that we see in Arcane that weaves back and forth together, only ever touching each other lightly, but the effects impact every character in the show. We see the tale of Violet and Powder growing up in the undercity of Piltover, trying to skate by through thievery and pure grit, while also seeing the story of Jace, a young scientist who wants to harness the power of magic, the titular Arcane, to better the people of the world. It's Powder stealing some of the gemstones that Jace has been using for his experiments that leads to his further development of the technology that would soon become Hex Tech and would impact everything from this point onward. What makes the storytelling work so well, though, is the fact that we're always given a moment to breathe in the story. For all the excitement, action, and fight scenes that are in this series, there are just as many moments where the characters have quiet conversations, or times where they just realize what situation they're in. A perfect example is actually in this very first episode, where Vi's adoptive father Vander sits her down to talk her about responsibility, trying to temper her hot-headed nature. This comes right after her having an out-and-out brawl with a bunch of other street thugs. Fighting for fighting's sake here is never the focus, with each and every instance of a character attacking another having some deeper reasoning behind it all. That's perhaps the major draw of Arcane as a whole, as the deeper reasoning can be applied to just about everything in the show. No character is simply doing things without reason. From Vi wanting to prove herself, to Jace wanting to bring the wonders of magic to Piltover, to Heimerdinger wanting to protect everyone, everyone has a motivation and drive that pushes them into their actions throughout the series. And that's perhaps the biggest thing that really hit me as I was watching this show that made me enjoy it as much as I did: the consistency. One of the problems we've had with a lot of other media over the years really comes down to the fact that characters will act the way they act because we've seen that exact same plot played out a million other times in other series or movies. Like, here's a good example of what I'm talking about in Arcane itself.
You know what, Milo? You're right. There's a bunch of things Powder just can't do.
Now, in almost every other series you've watched, the whole hearing about someone saying something bad about you but not really meaning it bullcrap would usually result in the character who overheard things running away or doing something stupid, right? We've seen it done so many other times in so many other shows. But here, instead of running off, Powder just brings it up to Vi, which then results in a scene of Vi building Powder up. They took a well-known and tired trope and not only subverted it, but also used the moment to grow the relationships of the characters as a whole, and all while keeping the characters in line with how they've been shown to act. Powder wouldn't go and run off without her big sister, nor would she go and become violent just yet either. She sulks and then confronts the one person she knows that she can trust at that point, Vi, about the entire thing. And here's the kicker: every character follows that consistency. At no point do we see anyone yelling out those by-the-numbers dialogue that we've seen hundreds of times. Everything that the characters are, what they want, and what they will do all comes down from the actual choices that they've made. Vi will always go after her sister to try and help her because that's her sister and that will never go away. Jace wants to make everyone's lives better, but is too short-sighted to see the potential problems that his science can create. Heimerdinger isn't willing to do anything with magic at all, driven by his past to not see those same mistakes repeated themselves by humans whose lives will be long gone while he's still around. Never once does it feel like the story is being told and that the characters are along for the ride. It always feels like the choices of one person spread out to affect the rest of the cast, even if it's only for a single moment. And none of these choices ever feel like it's done for an arbitrary reason. It always feels like this would be the action these characters would take, and those actions have consequences. That's probably one of the underlying themes of the entire show. Actions have consequences, the series, if you will. While there are other themes that play strongly among everything, such as the bonds of love, of magic versus science, of the have and have-nots between the two cities, it's the fact that every single choice made will be something that reflects back onto the rest of the series that I feel is the core and central idea. Between this and how everything is so incredibly character-driven, Arcane feels like this could have only happened in this world and not any other, and that's something that's incredibly hard to capture for any medium. As you've probably noticed though, I've not really been going into much detail when it comes to the actual series itself, outside of a few names and places, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is because despite being only 9 episodes long, Arcane is packed to the brim with events that I feel like summarizing the way I do occasionally on the show isn't something that would really work here, at least not for an introductory episode. The other reason? I'm just not really wanting to spoil things. Yes, I know, I've said I would stop caring about not spoiling things and just tell you all straight up about the subject we're talking about, but in Arcane's case, it's really that good, and I'd rather not spoil things for you. Like, just do this. Give the first 3 episodes a try, and if you're not hooked, then you can drop it there. That's more than enough, in my opinion, for anyone who's curious to see the rest of the series to binge it right then and there. What I will say though is that there are a couple of warnings I've got for anyone who's wanting to watch the series. First and foremost, if you're a fan of League of Legends, leave almost everything you know about the game at the door. Not only is this a much more serious look at the franchise, but the character ideas of champions like Vi, Jace, and Victor are more like guidelines, and considering that most of the characters from League itself are pretty flat considering they're just there to have battle quips, yeah, it's good that they're a bit deeper here. The second warning I would like to give to anyone watching this is that despite being based on a fairly average game in terms of graphic violence and whatnot, Arcane is definitely on the older side of mature when it comes to how it portrays things. While not outright gory or graphic, characters will get hurt, bleed, and there's even a bit of nudity here or there. And, well, a rather tastefully and well done sex scene that I wasn't expecting at all. So yeah, for any parents watching this episode, you might want to give the series a watch before you let your younger League players jump in here. The third and final warning for the series I'll give you is to prepare you mentally. Arcane is not a happy-go-lucky series. If I'm entirely honest, there are points where I would compare the show to a Greek tragedy. While there are some wonderful and even happy moments, the story is grim, downright dark in some places, and it delights in hurting its characters. And while I honestly do think that we need sad stories to enjoy sometimes, I know for some people that's an instant nope, so I wanted to make sure that you all had the heads up. Adaptations are hard. We've known this for years. But Arcane not only shows that it can be done, but it can be done so well that it changes the very game it originally came from. It moves forward not only how things are done with animation and music, but just what could be done for any video game based series for the future. And with Season 2 announced to be coming out later this year, trust me when I say you'll be seeing me talking about this show again, along with all the tears that it's going to cause. With all that said, I hope I've done a good job to entertain you, and I'll do my best to do so again in the future. Hopefully you'll follow along with my content by subscribing and doing all the other things that gives us YouTubers life. If you want to support me a bit more, I do have a Patreon where you can get access to bonus content. But until next time, stay frosty.